Della Ord had 2 weeks to be off the only piece of ground nobody else wanted, a Wyoming winter already dropping past 30 below, and, buried under that ground, a fire that had been burning for longer than anyone in the county could say. It was the winter of 1887, on the edge of the Powder River country, in the broken land the ranchers called the burning ground. In places out there, a coal seam ran close under the surface, and somewhere, long ago, a lightning strike, a grass fire that found an outcrop, one of those seams had caught, and it had been smoldering underground ever since, slow and deep and patient, warming the earth above it. The cattlemen fenced around it. They said the ground was rotten, that a horse could break through into a hot pocket, that the smoke seeping up on still mornings was the breath of something better left alone. For all practical purposes, the burning ground was considered good for nothing. Della's husband Amos had been dead since September. A wagon rolled on a grade and the doctor 2 days away. 40 years old. No children of her own. No claim the cattle company would honor. She was not entirely alone. Her sister had died the winter before and left a girl of 9, a quiet child named Sadie, and Della had taken her. Now the two of them were what was left. A childless widow and an orphan, on a homestead the company had already decided was theirs. The company's man came in November, polite and certain. The Ord claim sat in the middle of range the company leased, he said, and a widow with no heir had no standing to hold it through another winter. They would pay her a fair price to sign and go. She could stay in the house 2 weeks while she thought it over. He did not think she would need the 2 weeks. He looked on his way out at the far corner of the claim where a thread of smoke rose from the frozen ground, and he said it was a shame about the burning ground. It made the lower quarter useless and dangerous and dropped the value of the whole section. Della said she supposed it did. By the time the deep cold came down that January, the same men who had fenced the burning ground off as worthless would be crossing the frozen range in the dark to beg the widow for a place on her dangerous, rotten, good-for-nothing dirt. What none of them had ever troubled to learn was the thing Della's father, who had mined coal in the old country, had told her as a girl. The earth over a burning seam does not freeze. The fire is far down and slow and will outlast every man who fears it, and the ground above it, if you know how to use it and how to respect it, stays warm all winter long. Della did not sign. She waited until the company man was gone, and then she walked out to the burning ground with a shovel and a bar and stood a long time reading the snow. That was the tell her father had taught her. Where the seam burned closest, the snow did not lie. It melted as it fell, or never gathered, and the bare, warm patches made a map, if you knew to read it, of where the fire ran under your feet. She found a low bank at the edge of the burning ground where the earth was warm to the hand a foot down, and the snow would not hold. Warm, but not too warm, well back from the pockets the cattlemen feared. And she began to dig. She cut into the bank the way her father had described cutting a coal country dugout, a room dug back into the warm ground, roofed with poles and a heavy blanket of sod, a low door hung with a double curtain of old quilts to hold the heat and turn the wind. She did not dig down toward the fire. That was the whole art of it and the whole danger. She dug into the warm skin of the earth above the seam, where the heat rose gently through the dirt, and no closer. It took her 9 days, working the short daylight, Sadie carrying the loose dirt out in a bucket. When it was finished, the dugout was warm without any fire at all. The earth gave up the seam's heat slow and even through the floor and the back wall, and the sod roof held it, and even on a bitter night the little room stayed near 50 degrees off the ground alone. She kept a small stove for cooking and for the worst nights, but the earth did most of the work, as her father had promised it would. She and Sadie moved in before Christmas. She told no one. The cold that came down on the Powder River country in the middle of January was the kind that killed cattle by the thousand that winter, the winter the ranchers would remember with a shudder for the rest of their lives. The temperature fell past 35 below and stayed. The wind came behind it. On the open range, the cattle drifted and died against the fences, and the men who rode out to save them came back with frozen faces and some did not come back at all until the thaw. And in the worst of it, Della nearly killed the child. She had been proud of how tight the dugout held its heat, and on the coldest night she made it tighter, banked the little stove, dropped the second quilt over the door, sealed the last gap where the cold had been sliding in. She wanted the warmth kept. What she had not reckoned with was that a room dug into burning ground does not only take heat from the earth. On a still, sealed night, the ground can give up more than warmth. Somewhere below, the slow fire breathed, and its breath found the smallest ways up through the dirt, and in a room sealed tight against the cold, it began, very quietly, to gather. She woke in the black hours with a headache like a band of iron, and a wrongness she could not name. And when she reached for Sadie, the child was heavy and slow, and would not properly wake. She got the door open. She dragged the quilts down and the clean, killing air in, and the child out into it. Out into 35 below with a blanket around her. Because bad air will take you gentle in your sleep, and the cold, at least, will not. She held Sadie in the doorway and made her breathe until the child came back, coughing, crying, alive. Della did not sleep again that night. She sat in the cold doorway with the girl in her arms and understood what she had done. The warm ground was a gift, and the warm ground was a danger, and the two could not be separated. The same slow fire that heated the floor breathed a poison you could not smell, and a room over a burning seam must never, ever be sealed. It had to breathe, always, the way the fire breathed. In the morning, hollow-eyed and frightened, she cut a vent. She drove a shaft up through the sod roof at the back and set a hollow length of stovepipe in it, open to the sky, so the ground's breath had a way out that was not her lungs. It cost her heat. The room ran cooler after, and she burned more wood to make up the difference, and it cost her a day of hard work in killing cold. She paid both without complaint. She would rather be cold and breathing than warm and gone, and so would the child, and she never sealed that door tight again as long as she lived. Sadie's chest was weak the rest of that winter, a cough that lingered, a wheeze on the cold days. It eased by spring. But Della carried the memory of the black hours a long time, and it made her careful in a way that would, before the winter was out, save more lives than her own. There was a morning after the vent was cut, when she stood in the doorway with Sadie's cough in her ears and the whole white range dead silent around them, and thought seriously about walking to town and signing the company's paper and being done. Trading the dangerous warm ground for 4 safe walls somewhere that had never tried to kill her child in the night. She got her coat as far as her shoulders. Then she looked at the stovepipe breathing its thin white thread against the blue, and the warm floor, and the child finally sleeping easy, and she took the coat off again. The ground had shown her its teeth. It had also kept them alive through cold that was killing grown men on the open range. She would learn to live with both. The cold did not lift for 11 days. On the range, the company's own riders were in trouble. On the 4th day of it, a line rider named Crook, sent out to check the drift fences and caught too far from the bunkhouse when the wind rose, made it as far as the edge of the ord claim on a failing horse and saw, through the blowing snow, the one thing that should not have been there. A thread of wood smoke, and below it, bare warm ground where no snow lay. He turned the horse toward it because it was that or die, and he half fell against Della's curtained door. She took him in. She warmed him slow, the way you have to, hands in cool water first and not the fire. And she fed him, and she kept the door breathing. Crook lay in the warm dugout and looked at the earth floor that was warm without a fire under it, and he asked her how, and she told him. The seam, the warm ground, the vent that had to stay open. He had ridden past the burning ground 100 times and been told 100 times it was worthless. He was not the last. Over the 11 days of the great cold, the warm ground on the ord claim brought them in, 1 and 2 at a time. A neighbor family burned out of fuel, 2 of the company's own hands who could not reach the bunkhouse, a freighter stranded on the road. Della kept the vent open and the door curtained and let them come. She dug a second, larger room into the bank for the ones who needed to stay, and she taught every soul who sheltered there the one rule that mattered. The ground gives you warmth, and you give it air, and you never forget which is which. She did not charge. It was not her ground to sell the warmth of, she said. It belonged to the fire. When the cold broke, the company's man came back. He had heard, as the whole county had, that the burning ground he had called worthless had kept a dozen people alive through the worst winter in living memory, including 2 of his own riders. He did not talk about signing and going. He talked instead about an arrangement, that Della hold the claim in the warm ground, that the company pay her a keeper's fee to maintain it as a waypoint on the winter range, and that no rider caught out in a norther would ever again be turned away from the one warm ground in 40 miles. Della kept the claim for the rest of her life. Sadie grew up on it and never quite lost the winter cough, and never once complained of it, because she knew what it had bought. The stovepipe on the dugout roof breathed its thin white thread every winter after, and every soul who sheltered there learned the rule and passed it on, so that in that corner of the Powder River country, the children grew up knowing a thing their fathers had never troubled to learn, that the ground everyone feared would keep you alive if you gave it air, and killed you quiet if you didn't. The fire down there, Della used to say, had been burning since before her grandfather's grandfather. It did not care whether she froze, but it would keep her warm all the same, as long as she remembered to let it breathe. If this story made you think of someone who found warmth in the very thing everyone else was afraid of, leave their name in the comments. And if you want to hear more of these stories, the women the frontier underestimated and what they quietly understood, subscribe. We tell them one at a time, and we don't rush them.